Granny is the titular supernatural antagonist of the games with the same name, which have a deep yet ambiguous story involving other supernatural entities such as Grandpa, Angeline, Slenderman, Slenderina, Slenderina's husband, and a child, presumably being inspired by a mix of legends and myths. As the story is hugely left open for interpretation, that's what we're gonna do today. Hi folks, I'm R, your narrator. This video will contain spoilers about all of the installments of the Slenderina, Slenderman, and Granny series. With that in mind, let's begin. Granny is an entity which is proven to be of supernatural nature due to her glowing red eyes and immunity to gunshots. She traps people in her house and cellar, including cells, presumably usually men, due to a personal vendetta she still holds, which we will talk about later in the video. In the first game, several writings and a note on a scrap piece of paper inform the player that he isn't Granny's first victim. In fact, there have been many more people she had trapped and killed. One of her ways of killing being the guillotine she sketched and designed, presumably by herself. In the second one, the trend continues with another person waking up in the cellar, yet another victim of Granny. Except in this one, Granny is accompanied by another vicious accomplice called Grandpa. The third installment starts a little different, with the protagonist entering the premises on his will. Upon getting caught by the Grandpa, he gets shot and taken to the cellar cell, where he finds remains of some other victims in different cells. Who is Granny and her malevolent family members? Let's start from the beginning and discuss Granny's story. Let's start with the first installment in the series, Granny 1. The player wakes up in a room. Upon further inspection of the house, he comes across the Granny, a white-eyed, grotesque old woman in a white nightgown and patchy white hair. She wields a bloodied bat and has blood on her mouth, giving us a clue of how she attacks and kills her victims. After shooting Granny by finding disassembled parts of a shotgun and assembling the gun, we learn that Granny is immune to bullets, and possibly she's immortal, being immune to death. This can be further fortified by a diary we find in one of Slenderina's installments, which is written in 1892, suggesting that Granny is extremely old. The blood on her mouth suggests that she bites or even eats parts of her victims. Maybe not her preferable way of killing them, as she has hand-designed a guillotine and likes to imprison her victims to death, as seen in the third installment. Nonetheless, she still bites and possibly even eats her victims, hence why she has been thought of sharing resemblance to zombies. Investigating further, the player finds a mysterious crib with no baby in it or anywhere near to find. After collecting a teddy bear and placing it inside the crib, a ghost of a woman known as Slenderina shows up, leaving a key behind and disappearing. Exploring a bit more, we can find a woman shackled to a wall and presumably dead. We later find out this victim is called Angeline, the daughter of Granny. Therefore, it becomes evident that a tragedy has taken place here, causing the death of two women, Angeline and Slenderina, a possible child, and maybe even Granny herself, who is now hostile and seeks for blood. In myths, and legends, an entity known as the White Lady in a white dress and long black hair is well known in many different countries. In one tale originating from Netherlands, there's an evil spirit of a woman who imprisons men who had been mistreating women and abusing them. This evil spirit punishes them for a while, then eventually kills them to deliver a swift justice. Although the story is not identical to Granny's, it bears close resemblance. Granny seems to be a malevolent presence who lures men or drags them into her house. She gives them 5 days of mentally and physically tormenting them before she kills them. She also had chained up her daughter, Angeline, to a wall, causing her death. Now, why would Granny kill her own daughter? In the Child of Slenderina's ending, we find a diary that tells us the backstory on how Slenderina and her father died, the Slender Man. July 10th, 1892. Dear Diary, it has been a good day today, but I'm starting to feel dizzy and nauseous now. The whole family went to the park and the weather was wonderful. Mother was in an extra good mood, which doesn't happen that often. When we came home, she cooked us dinner. I thought it tasted a bit weird, but didn't dare to say anything. Father looked pale and had to lie down straight after dinner. I can hear him in the other room. The pain! I'm feeling even worse now. My head is spinning. Therefore, we learned that Angeline, Slenderina's mother, and the Granny's daughter was the culprit behind Slenderina's and Simon or Slenderman's death. This probably angered Granny very much, making her shackle Angeline to a wall and let her rot. The reason why Angeline kills her husband and daughter are left to interpretation, one of which might be due to Angeline's unstable mental health, as we see a portrait of her in the asylum alongside Slenderina, which could be suggestive of her being admitted to the surreal asylum and giving birth to Slenderina in there, as we also can find a baby on a table. There are several other theories, one common one suggesting that this child belongs to a Slenderina, but I still believe it's Slenderina herself, as it bears no resemblance to the child, and this one looks almost identical to Slenderina. Therefore, we get a glimpse of how broken and unhealthy this family is. There's another folklore about an evil, vengeful spirit of a woman who lures unfaithful men into her house and kills them. This entity used to be a woman who was cheated on by her husband. In sorrow and despair due to her partner's infidelity, she kills her child and herself. She then arises as a hostile spirit, desperately trying to find her child, while killing anyone in her way. Yet another one is of a woman who loses her child and eventually dies due to a heart attack or extreme sorrow. Then she arises yet again as a spiteful spirit, trying to find her child, killing anyone in her way. These stories can compare to Slenderina's, as when the player places the teddy bear in the crib, Slenderina's soul appears and then goes away, leaving a key behind, presumably becoming satisfied, as the teddy bear might have belonged to her child and embodies the essence of her child. Granny also becomes angry and gets glowing red eyes after the teddy bear is taken, showing that Granny cared about Slenderina and her child very much, hence why she becomes very angry and shackled up Angeline. Getting back to Granny and the first game, the player finds several writings on the walls and items begging for help. After a thorough investigation, the player finds a note from the previous victim and how he got cut. This is my 5th day in this house. She chases me wherever I go. I'm quite injured. And my body hurts. The only thing I remember before I woke up in this house is that I was driving when my car suddenly broke down. I went out to see what the problem was when someone suddenly hit me in the head. I have managed to open a pair of locks in the front door, but that's all. Why does she do this? I hope no one will experience the same thing as I do. If I do not survive this, and if someone finds this message, I've noticed that she sometimes hides things inside fruits. Therefore, Granny is an entity that lures or drags her victims into the isolated houses she occupies and toys around with them before killing them. The third installment is an exception as the victim walks into the house herself, but we'll get back to that later. A dismantled vehicle and shotgun can be found in the house, which many believe to have belonged to this victim. But in my opinion, it's Granny's car, as the victim's car broke down, maybe due to Granny placing a trap and intentionally ambushing the victim. Either way, the victim's car wouldn't be able to drive to Granny's location, and Granny has to somehow get to the location she ambushes her victims, which is possibly by using her car. She also places puzzles around the house, dismantling the car on purpose to torment her victims and give them a sense of hope, so she can toy around with them. After fixing the car, we realize that the garage's door is barricaded, therefore proving that the car was not dismantled by accident, but in fact, the Granny did it intentionally to play around with her victims. After completing the game, Granny is seen on the porch having the teddy bear next to her, while Slenderina appears behind her, suggesting that both Slenderina and Granny presumably work together in tormenting these victims, who might be abusers of women, while Granny misses her granddaughter Slenderina. The player in Granny 1 is probably assisted by Slenderina after he shows to be not a bad man, at least to Slenderina's eyes, as he places the teddy bear in the crib, showing he respects Slenderina and her child. Now let's move on to the second game. In the second installment, many more characters and creatures get introduced. Instead of one, we now have two antagonists, Grandma alongside Granny. Grandma has a crowbar and occasionally likes to take naps, but unlike this mortal habit, he's also immune to bullets and presumably death. His origin is a bit ambiguous, but just like Granny, he seems to be a vengeful entity after blood. Inspecting the house, we can find a coffin which belongs to Slenderina's husband, a vampire who is also known as Liev. We learn he is Slenderina's husband in a picture of him standing next to Slenderina and their child, a grotesque child badly deformed into the shape of a spider. Not long after, we can find this child in a cell, who is very vicious. After killing or injuring it, the ghost of Slenderina shows up, screeching, having angry red eyes, a sign that the player might have been brought to the house similarly to the previous victims, being thought to be an abuser of women. Hence why Slenderina specifically becomes angrier after her child is attacked by this man. Another big change in the game is the house. Instead of the previous house, this place now seems to be close to sewers. In the water, we find a monstrous octopus which can eat the protagonist. From many notes scattered around, we learn that this monster is bred and raised by Granny and Grandpa, maybe as a pet or maybe as a guard to prevent the victims from escaping. In one of the endings, we can see Granny sitting inside a car, which fortifies the theory earlier in Granny 1 that Granny drives around and ambushes their victims, then drives them back with her car, placing them in their rooms. In the third installment, the house is yet again in an entirely different place, having remote-controlled gates, cameras, and even a collapsible bridge, making it extremely difficult for the victims to escape. It seems as if Granny, still accompanied by Grandpa, keep on changing their location not to be exposed to getting caught or found out. They also always improve their security, preventing the victims from escaping, and always choose isolated places to make it ideal for toying around with their victims and prevent any outside interference. This time, unlike the previous two games, the victim walks into the house himself and then gets shot by Grandpa and taken to a cell. This proves that Grandpa and Granny are sadistic, and the theory that suggests that they only ambush bad men is just an excuse for them to torture them. It's possible instead of ambushing this man, the man had some sort of problem, presumably having his car broken down, and found the nearest place to ask for help, ending up in Granny's new house. Yet again, if the victim finds a teddy bear here and places it in the crib, Slenderina leaves the victim alone and helps him with escaping, leaving a key behind. Throughout the game, Slenderina hunts and scares the victim, helping Granny to catch him. But if the victim proves not to be a bad man, Slenderina helps him. In conclusion, all of the entities within the game have supernatural origins. Granny and Grandpa have more tangible presence, while Slenderina is a ghost. Granny and Grandpa are quite intelligent and have good hearing, as they place intricate puzzles around the house and toy around with their victims despite looking like zombies. They have immunity to bullets, but still can be stunned and knocked out for a short while. Meanwhile, Slenderina is a ghost, but she is more reasonable, as when the victims place the teddy bear in the crib, she leaves them alone, thinking they might be good men. Therefore, Granny and Grandpa must suffer from some sort of mental problems and could be quite sadistic, as it possibly ran down to their child, Angeline, who seems to have mental disorders and depression, which leads her to kill her family by poisoning them, including Slenderina. Granny, who possibly has mental disorders herself, shackled Angeline and let her die. It's clear that this entire family benefits from supernatural abilities, however, as the diary of Slenderina was written in 1800s, making Granny very old, who still roams on the earth, considering the third game possibly taking place in early 2000s at least, as cameras and monitors are used.